What would you do if the very child you gave everything for, your time, your health, your dreams, abandoned you on the day you needed them the most? I asked myself that question the morning I picked up the phone, hoping my son Mark would drive me to my last chemotherapy appointment. My body was too weak for the bus, too frail to even make it down the icy Boston street alone. All I needed was his presence for one final stretch of this battle. But when his voice came through the line, sharp and impatient, my heart sank before I even asked. I swallowed my pride and said softly, "Mark, it's my last treatment. Could you please take me?" The silence on the other end told me everything. Then he said it, "I have other plans, Mom. This is important for my career. Golf, outing, clients." All of it suddenly meant more to him than I did. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking for the world. Just a ride. Just an hour of his time. Yet somehow that was too much. In that moment, the kind of cold that no blanket could ever chase away set into my chest. I had worked myself to the bone for this boy, my boy. After his father left, it was the two of us against the world. I scrubbed floors, I waited tables. I starved myself some nights so he would have enough to eat. I thought love like mine would be unbreakable, that sacrifice would mean something in the end. But that day, I realized something painful. The hardest battles aren't fought in hospital rooms, but in the silence that follows when your own child turns away. Before I go on, let me pause for you, honey. May your days be filled with strength, your nights with peace, and your heart with the kind of love that outlasts every storm. And if you're here with me on this journey, please subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I remember sitting there in my old armchair after that call, staring at the faded wallpaper, wondering how a son I poured my soul into could speak to me as if I were nothing but a burden. He said I was always making him feel guilty. Guilty? After all the nights I worked 2 shifts and still came home to help him with homework? After the winters we sat in a freezing apartment because I couldn't afford to fix the boiler, pretending it was a game so he wouldn't feel ashamed? You know, when you're young, you believe that love guarantees loyalty. But as you grow older, you learn that sacrifice doesn't always buy gratitude. I thought raising him alone would make us closer. I thought he would look at me and see not just his mother, but his greatest supporter, his safe place. Instead, he saw inconvenience. I pressed the phone to my chest that night, tears soaking into my sweater, whispering to myself, "This is my last treatment. My last one." Why couldn't he just be there? It wasn't about the ride. It wasn't even about the hospital. It was about being seen, about not walking into that cold, sterile room alone after years of fighting. But to him, I was just another appointment to dodge. And that's where my story truly begins. Not with my illness, not even with the years of sacrifice, but with the silence that followed when he hung up. In that silence, something inside me broke, but something else began to rise. Before I carry on, let me ask you, have you ever been let down by the very person you thought would never leave your side? If you have, you know the sting I'm talking about. Share your story in the comments. I promise you're not alone. The night before my appointment, I barely slept. My body was weak, but my mind wouldn't rest. I thought about the little boy who used to cling to my apron strings, the boy who once cried if I left him with a neighbor for even an hour. Where had he gone? When did he become a man who could toss his mother aside for cocktails and handshakes? Morning came cold and unforgiving. I pulled on my thickest sweater, the one with worn sleeves, and stared at myself in the mirror. My hair was thin, my cheeks hollow, but my eyes still carried a spark. A stubborn fire that said, "You will get to that hospital no matter what." So I stepped into the freezing Boston air, one slow step at a time. Each breath felt like sandpaper in my lungs, but I pushed on until I reached the bus stop. My legs gave way, and I sank onto the bench, clutching my chest, whispering a prayer that I would make it. That's when a car slowed down beside me. The window rolled down, and a woman with kind eyes leaned out. "Are you all right, dear? You look unwell." I wanted to say no. I wanted to wave her off. But the truth is, her voice carried the compassion I had been begging to hear from my own child. She introduced herself as Brenda, a nurse at the very hospital I was heading to, and offered me a ride. Strange, isn't it? Sometimes the people who owe us nothing give us everything. while the ones who owe us everything give us nothing at all. This was the moment the story shifted. Betrayal had opened a wound, but kindness planted a seed. And before long, that seed would grow into something Mark could never have imagined, justice in the purest form. So stay with me, because you're about to hear how a mother's heartbreak turned into a reckoning. I became a single mother when I was still young enough to believe that love could conquer anything. Mark's father walked out on us one gray afternoon, leaving me with a half-written note and an empty promise that he'd keep in touch. He never did. My son was only 6 years old then, clutching his toy truck and asking me when Daddy was coming back. I told him the truth in the gentlest way I could. It's just you and me now, sweetheart. But that's enough, because I'll never leave you. From that day forward, I carried the weight of both parents on my shoulders. By day I scrubbed floors in houses that smelled of perfumes I could never afford. By night I waited tables at a diner where the scent of grease clung to my uniform long after I washed it. My hands cracked from bleach, my feet blistered from standing, but I didn't complain. I was determined to give my boy everything I never had. There were winters when the boiler broke and we spent weeks sleeping in our coats. I told Mark it was a camping adventure. There were evenings when dinner was only beans and rice, and I slid the bigger share onto his plate while pretending I wasn't hungry. I worked double shifts, sometimes triple, and stumbled into bed long after midnight. Still, no matter how tired I was, I made sure to sit beside him with his homework, praising every answer he got right. I watched him grow into a bright young man. He was sharp, quick with numbers, and always dreamed big. I told myself the sleepless nights and the missed meals were worth it, because one day he would have choices I never did. And in many ways I was right. Mark excelled at school, graduated with honors, and landed a job in finance. Soon he had a sleek condo overlooking the water, a sports car parked in the garage, and a wardrobe filled with tailored suits. When I visited, he'd take me to expensive restaurants, places where the silverware gleamed and the servers spoke in hushed tones. He'd say, "Mom, isn't this amazing? We never had anything like this growing up." I smiled proud, but there was always a hollow space inside me. His success had come at the cost of distance. You see, with every promotion and every new luxury, I felt him slipping further away. Phone calls became shorter, visits became rarer, and whenever I asked when I might see him, the answer was always the same: "I'm busy, Mom. I've got a lot going on." I told myself it was just the demands of his career, that he would come around once things settled. But things never did. He always had time for colleagues, for weekend trips, for parties, but never for me. Still, a mother's heart clings to hope even when evidence points elsewhere. I kept telling myself, he loves you. He's just caught up in life. But deep down, I knew better. Then came the cancer. The diagnosis hit like a blow I couldn't brace for. Chemo drained me of everything: my energy, my appetite, my hair, my strength. I watched the woman I used to be vanish in the mirror. Yet even then, I tried to keep my pride. I told neighbors I was managing fine, even when I could barely carry groceries up the stairs. I told myself I didn't need to ask for help. But when the final round of treatment approached, I knew I couldn't do it alone. The bus ride was too long, the walk too heavy. I needed my son. That evening, I sat in my armchair with the phone in my hand, staring at Mark's number. My thumb hovered over the call button, and my chest tightened. Asking him felt like stepping onto thin ice, knowing it could crack at any moment. I whispered, "Please let him be there for me. Just this once." The phone rang 3 times before he answered. His tone was clipped, rushed. "Hey, Mom, I'm in the middle of something." "What's up?" No warmth. No, "How are you feeling?" Just impatience. I steadied my voice and said, "Mark, it's my last appointment tomorrow. I don't think I'm strong enough to take the bus. Could you drive me? It would mean a lot." There was silence, long enough for me to think the call had dropped. Then he spoke. "Mom, you know I would, but I already have plans. It's a golf outing with important clients. A huge opportunity for me. You can just take a taxi, right? I'll send you the money." The word stung like a slap. I swallowed hard. "Mark, it's not about the money. I just wanted you to be there." He sighed, irritated. "Please don't do this. You're always making me feel guilty." I'm a grown man. I have my own life. You have to understand. Understand? That after years of putting his needs first, after decades of carrying the world so he wouldn't have to, I was now a burden? I whispered, I understand, Mark. I'm sorry I bothered you. And I ended the call before he could say anything else. I sat in silence, the phone heavy in my lap, tears burning my eyes. The cold from the window seeped into my bones, but it wasn't the winter air that chilled me. It was loneliness. The humiliation of realizing that the person I trusted most had turned his back when I needed him most. That night, I wrapped myself in a blanket and whispered prayers into the darkness. I told myself, you'll get there tomorrow, Irene. Even if you have to crawl. But deep in my chest, I carried a new kind of ache, one that no medicine could ease. It was the ache of knowing that love, no matter how fierce, doesn't guarantee loyalty. And that sometimes the child you'd give your life for doesn't think your life is worth an hour of their time. So let me ask you, have you ever felt abandoned by someone you trusted most? Have you ever asked for so little, only to be met with excuses that cut like knives? If you have, then you know the pain I felt that night. Share your story in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not alone. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that went beyond illness. My body felt drained. Each limb weighted as if I had stones tied to me. But I was stubborn. I whispered to myself, get up, Irene. One last treatment. You can't give in now. I put on my thickest sweater, the one that had grown loose from my shrinking frame, and wrapped a scarf around my neck. When I glanced in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. My hair was nothing more than wisps, my cheeks hollow, my skin pale as paper. Yet my eyes, though tired, still held a glimmer of fight. Step by step, I made my way down the 3 flights of stairs in my building. The railing rattled under my grip, but I held on like it was my lifeline. Outside, the air cut through me like glass. Boston winters are merciless, and that day was no exception. The sidewalk glittered with patches of ice, and the wind pushed against me as though daring me to turn back. But I refused. The bus stop was only a block away, yet it felt like a mile. By the time I reached the corner, my lungs burned, and my legs trembled so badly I collapsed onto the bench. My breath came in sharp, shallow bursts, and my vision blurred. I thought, this might be the end, right here on this cold bench. That's when I heard the hum of a car engine slowing beside me. A window rolled down, and a gentle voice called out, "Are you all right, dear? You look like you're about to fall over." I turned my head and saw a woman with warm, crinkled eyes. She had on a nurse's jacket, her ID badge clipped to the front. She leaned slightly out the window, concern etched in her face. I tried to wave her off. "I'm fine," I lied, though every bone in my body screamed otherwise. "Just catching my breath." "Nonsense," she replied firmly yet kindly. "I work at the hospital. Let me give you a ride." "Please don't argue." For a moment, my pride wrestled with my exhaustion. I had never been one to ask for help, not from strangers. But something in her tone, so steady, so sincere, broke through my resistance. I nodded weakly. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." She introduced herself as Brenda. The moment I sank into the passenger seat, I felt a wave of relief. The warmth of the car wrapped around me, chasing away the icy sting of the wind. For the first time in days, I felt safe. As we drove, she chatted about ordinary things, the weather, grocery prices, the chaos of traffic. She didn't probe into my illness, didn't pity me, and that alone was a gift. Her kindness felt effortless, unlike the calculated indifference I had felt from my own son. When we reached the hospital, she parked and turned to me. "I'll be around today. I work in oncology. If you see me in the halls, don't be a stranger." She squeezed my arm gently, gave me a reassuring smile, and left me at the entrance. I watched her walk away, a lump rising in my throat. This woman, a complete stranger, had shown me more compassion in 20 minutes than my son had in months. That thought dug deep into me like a thorn. The hospital doors slid open with a low hiss, and the familiar scent of disinfectant hit me. I had been here so many times that the hallways felt like a second home, though not one I ever wanted. My steps were slow, my body heavy, but I forced myself to move forward. Each appointment had drained a little more of me, and this one, my last, felt like both a finish line and a cliff. At the reception desk, the nurse called my name, Irene Miller. I nodded, handed over my ID, and followed her through the winding corridors. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with a calm face that radiated patience. She led me into a small treatment room, its walls pale and unwelcoming, a single recliner chair waiting in the center. I lowered myself into the chair, gripping the armrest as if it could keep me grounded. The nurse began preparing the four, her hands steady, her voice soft. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. One more time, Irene. Just one more. But then something shifted in the air. I felt her pause. I opened my eyes and saw her staring at me, not with pity, but with surprise. Her gaze darted from me to her phone, which she had pulled from her pocket. She tapped quickly, her fingers trembling slightly, then held the screen in front of me. "Is this your son?" she asked. My heart lurched. On the screen was a photo from Brighton Bay Capital's social media page. There he was, Mark, standing tall in a tailored suit, his arm wrapped around a beautiful young woman. They were smiling, radiant, with champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Congratulations to our very own Mark Miller and his fiancée Jessica on their engagement." I blinked, my throat tightening. But what caught my attention wasn't just the announcement. It was the location. I recognized the restaurant instantly, a high-end place in the Seaport district. Mark had taken me there once for my birthday. It was blocks from his condo. And it was the same evening he told me he had a golf outing with important clients. The truth crashed over me like a wave. He hadn't been working. He hadn't been networking. He had been celebrating a new life, a new love, while I sat at home begging him for a simple ride to my last treatment. My chest clenched, not from the chemo drugs, but from something far worse. It wasn't just that he said no. It wasn't just that he turned me away. He lied. He chose his fiancée, his colleagues, his image, everything over me. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. The nurse's voice broke through softly. "I'm sorry. I thought you knew." I forced a small shake of my head. No, I didn't. Inside me, something snapped. The mother who had carried his dreams, who had held on to hope through every disappointment, felt herself die a little in that chair. What replaced her wasn't sorrow. It was something harder, colder. A seed had been planted in that moment, not of forgiveness, but of reckoning. When the nurse inserted the four and the medication began to drip into my veins, I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling tiles above me. The room was quiet, save for the steady rhythm of the machine. My body felt numb, but my mind was anything but. That picture on her phone wouldn't leave me. Mark's smile. His arm around his fiancée. The caption, announcing his engagement like it was the crowning achievement of his life. I thought of all the moments I had fought to give him a future, the nights I went without dinner so he could eat, the winters we endured without heat, the days I stumbled home bone-tired but still found the energy to read him a bedtime story. And this was what it came to, my son lying to me so he could toast champagne with people who didn't even know his middle name. It wasn't just neglect. It was betrayal. A deliberate choice. He didn't want to be near me because I reminded him of the life he left behind, a life that embarrassed him now that he had money and status. I closed my eyes, but instead of tears, a new kind of fire burned in me. Weak as I was, drained as I felt, something inside me hardened. If he thought he could cast me aside, pretend I didn't matter, he was wrong. I had lived too long, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much to let him erase me from his story. When the session ended, I asked for a wheelchair. My legs trembled too badly to walk, and I didn't trust myself to stay upright. As the orderly rolled me into the hallway, I saw Brenda standing there waiting. She waved warmly as though she had known I would need her. "There you are," she said, walking up beside me. "I thought I'd check on you." Her smile was gentle, her eyes kind, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. This stranger had shown me more loyalty in 2 short encounters than my own son had in months. She adjusted the blanket over my lap, a simple gesture, but it sent a wave of gratitude through me. On the ride home, I sat in silence, staring out the window as the city rushed by. Brenda's didn't press me for details, didn't ask about Mark or about the treatment. Instead, she talked about everyday things, her favorite bakery, the long line at the post office, the way Boston traffic never seemed to improve. Her voice grounded me, pulling me away from the darkness threatening to swallow me whole. But inside, the battle lines were already being drawn. I knew then that this wasn't the end of my story. My son's lie wasn't just a careless excuse. It was a clear message. He had chosen his new life over me. And if he thought I would simply fade away quietly, he underestimated me. I may have been weak in body, but I still had my mind, and I still had my will. Betrayal had cut me open, but in its place, it left a sharp edge I had never felt before. That edge whispered one word into my heart: revenge. When I came back to my apartment that evening, I didn't collapse into tears the way I thought I would. Instead, I sat in my armchair and stared at the wall, the photo of Mark and his fiancée still burning in my memory. At first, there was only silence inside me. Not grief, not even anger, just silence. But slowly, something began to stir in that quiet. It wasn't the voice of the mother who had begged her son for love. That voice was gone. This was different. This was the voice of a woman who had carried a boy on her back, who had worked through pain and hunger so he could stand tall. And now, after all that, he had lied to her face and left her to suffer alone. I wasn't going to beg again. I wasn't going to sit in the dark, waiting for crumbs of affection from someone who thought of me as nothing more than a nuisance. No. If Mark wanted a life built on lies, I was going to show the world the truth. The first step was simple: information. I pulled out my old laptop, the one Mark himself had given me years ago when he upgraded to a newer model. Its keys were worn, its screen faintly cracked, but it still worked. I typed his company name into the search bar: Brighton Bay Capital. The results poured in. Articles about mergers, smiling photos of executives shaking hands, pages full of corporate jargon I barely understood. But I pressed on, determined. If Mark had chosen this world over me, then I needed to learn everything I could about it. I found the company website, glossy and polished. There was his photo, standing tall in a tailored suit, with a caption that called him a rising star. My stomach turned. Below his profile was one for Jessica, his fiancée, head of investor relations. Her bio was filled with Ivy League credentials, volunteer boards, accolades I could never dream of. I studied her photo, the way her smile seemed rehearsed, perfect for a magazine. As I read, my chest tightened with memories I couldn't push away. Nights when I washed dishes at the diner until my hands bled, then took the early shift cleaning houses because Mark needed new school shoes. The Christmas when he begged for a video game console I couldn't afford, so I worked 3 weeks without a day off to buy it, only to eat crackers for dinner until the next paycheck came. The humiliation of sending him to birthday parties with secondhand clothes I had stitched over and over. Every sacrifice was carved into my bones, yet here he was, living a life that didn't even have room for me. I closed my eyes and whispered, "If you think I'm invisible, Mark, you're wrong. You made me strong long before you made me weak." That night, for the first time in years, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I planned. The next morning, I opened my laptop again, my fingers trembling, not from weakness this time, but from determination. I typed slower than most people, but each word I entered carried weight. Brighton Bay Capital scandals. Brighton Bay lawsuits. Brighton Bay complaints. At first, nothing but glowing articles filled the screen. Phrases like fast-rising firm, innovative strategies, and unparalleled success repeated over and over. But I knew better than to believe the polished headlines. Every company has cracks. You just have to look closely enough. Hours passed, and my eyes burned, but then I found something different. An old newspaper article about a family-owned deli in the North End that had been bought out years ago. The owner, a man named Tony, claimed he was pressured to sell for far less than the business was worth. The name at the center of the deal? Brighton Bay Capital. I leaned closer, reading every word. His business had been in his family for 3 generations. The article described how he'd fought to keep it alive, only to be cornered into signing papers that stripped it from him. The photo showed him standing in front of the shuttered deli, arms crossed, his face a mixture of anger and defeat. My chest tightened. I knew that look. It was the same one I saw in the mirror after Mark's call, the look of someone who had given everything, only to be discarded. I dug further. Court records. Forums where former employees whispered about shady practices. Mentions of aggressive takeovers and unfair valuations. And then, in a document buried deep in the records, I saw my son's name. Mark Miller. His signature was on one of the papers connected to the deli's sale. My heart dropped. My boy hadn't just lied to me. He had helped crush another person's life's work. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was larger. I sat back in my chair, my breath shaky. For years, I had told myself that my sacrifices gave him a chance to become a better man. But staring at his signature on those papers, I realized he had taken the lessons of survival I gave him and twisted them into weapons of greed. I whispered aloud, "Mark, you didn't just fail me. You failed the world around you." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to the image of Tony, standing in front of his closed deli. I decided I had to find him. I had to hear his story in his own words. If anyone could understand my pain, it would be him. Because in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice for both of us. Finding Tony wasn't difficult. His name and address were in the public directory, listed above the same shuttered deli I had read about. I dialed his number with trembling fingers, unsure of what I'd say. When he answered, his voice was rough, guarded. "Who is this?" "My name is Irene Miller," I began, studying my tone. "I think we share something in common. Brighton Bay Capital." There was silence on the other end. I pressed on. "My son, Mark Miller. He was one of the analysts on your deal. I've seen the records. I know they robbed you." The silence stretched so long I thought he might hang up. Then finally, "Meet me tomorrow. 11 o'clock. Corner Cafe on Hanover Street." And the line went dead. The next day, I wrapped myself in my heaviest coat and took a cab. My hands shook as I pushed open the cafe door. Inside, I saw him immediately. Broad shoulders, deep lines carved into his face, eyes sharp but weary. He looked me over, and I knew he was sizing me up. "You're Mark's mother," he said, more accusation than question. I admitted, sliding into the seat across from him. "But don't think for a second I'm here to defend him." For the next hour, I told him everything. The years of sacrifice, the nights without heat, the way I raised my son alone. I told him about the chemo, about the phone call, about the lie that shattered what little trust one had left. I spoke slowly, carefully, laying my life bare in front of this man who had lost his own. When I finished, Tony shook his head, his jaw tight. "They ruined me. That deli was my grandfather's. I thought I was securing a future for my kids. Instead, I signed away my pride. And your son was the one who pushed the deal through." He smiled while doing it. His hands clenched into fists. I reached across the table, my voice low but fierce. "We can't change what they've done to us, but we can make sure the world sees them for what they really are." For the first time, his hardened expression cracked. A flicker of something, agreement, maybe even hope, passed through his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. I leaned closer. "I'm suggesting we don't let them keep winning. Together, we can pull down the mask they hide behind. Your story, my story, they're threads of the same betrayal. And if we speak up, loudly enough, people will listen." He sat back, exhaling slowly. Then he gave a small, deliberate nod. "All right, Irene. Let's talk about how." At that table, two people broken by the same machine made a pact. It wasn't about revenge for its own sake anymore. It was about justice, for every hour of sacrifice, for every humiliation, for every honest man or woman stripped of what they worked for. And for me, it was about something more, making Mark face the truth of the man he had become. Tony and I sat in that cafe for hours, sketching out an idea that at first seemed impossible. What could a retired deli owner and a frail grandmother really do against a multimillion-dollar firm? But as the minutes passed, a fire sparked in both of us. We might not have money, but we had truth. And sometimes, truth is enough to tear down walls. I went home that night with a stack of notes scrawled on napkins and receipts. My laptop became my weapon. I created a new email account under a false name and started drafting a letter. Every sentence was deliberate, every word chosen to pierce through Brighton Bay's polished facade. I included Tony's sworn statement, the documents I had uncovered, and Mark's signature tying him to the deal. It wasn't a rant, it was evidence. Meanwhile, Tony promised to meet with the notary and sign an affidavit detailing exactly how he had been pressured into selling. His voice shook when he told me, "I've waited years for this, Irene. Years for someone to believe me. If you're willing to fight, so am I." At night, I would sit in my armchair, reading old memories that floated back uninvited. The winters without heat. The birthdays where I worked double shifts just to buy Mark the toy he wanted. The endless humiliation of being invisible in a world that never respected women like me. Those memories no longer broke me. They fueled me. Every sacrifice I made became another stone in the foundation of my resolve. One evening, after finishing another draft of the letter, I caught myself whispering, "What if you worked your whole life to build something, only to have it stolen by someone you trusted?" Have you seen this happen in your own community? Honest families losing everything while the powerful walk away richer? That's exactly what Brighton Bay has done, and my own son is at the center of it. So stay with me, because the plan I'm about to set in motion will shake the very ground he walks on. The words rolled off my tongue, not as a cry for pity, but as a declaration of war. When Tony came by the next day, I read the letter to him. He sat silently, then nodded. "Send it," he said. I hesitated, finger hovering over the mouse. Once I clicked, there would be no turning back. But the image of Mark, smiling in that engagement photo, hardened me. I pressed send. The message flew to journalists, bloggers, and financial watchdogs. Somewhere in the noise of the internet, our voices had finally been released. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled. For the first time in a long while, I felt powerful, not because I had strength in my body, but because I had taken my pain and turned it into action. So let me ask you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you stay quiet, or would you fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your heart. The morning after sending that letter, I woke with a strange stillness inside me. For weeks, my body had been weak and my spirit bruised, but now, for the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. The truth was no longer trapped inside me. It was out there, racing across invisible wires, waiting to be discovered. Still, doubt gnawed at me. What if no one cared? What if my message landed in a reporter's spam folder, dismissed as rambling from a faceless old woman with too much time on her hands? I tried to push the thought away, but every morning, as I sat at my small kitchen table with a chipped mug of tea, I refreshed my inbox, waiting for a sign. Nothing came. Days passed. My energy faded further with each one, yet my determination held steady. I whispered to myself, "Be patient. The world may be slow, but truth has a way of crawling into the light." Then, one evening, the phone rang. It was Tony. His voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Irene," he said, "a reporter called me. She mentioned the deli. She knows something wasn't right. She wants to talk." I nearly dropped the phone. "She called you? What did you say?" I said I'd show her the documents. "She's serious, Irene. They're finally listening." I sat in silence, the room spinning slightly around me. After years of being ignored, after months of carrying this wound, someone, finally, cared enough to look closer. A few days later, the first article appeared on a modest financial blog. My hands trembled as I scrolled. It didn't name Mark directly, but the description was clear. A young analyst at Brighton Bay had undervalued a family-owned deli, stripping the owner of his life's work. The article called it a dirty deal, hinting at a wider pattern of exploitation within the firm. The comments section came alive. Some readers demanded a full investigation. Others shared stories of local shops in their towns being forced out by wealthy investors. Within hours, the piece spread to social media. Bloggers, watchdog groups, and even smaller news outlets began to pick it up. Each retelling added fuel, and the spark I had lit started to grow into something much larger. I sat in my armchair, my laptop glowing on the table beside me, heart pounding with each headline. The shiny world my son had built was beginning to crack, one brick at a time. That's when the phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. My breath caught, but I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice unusually soft. "How are you feeling?" Suspicion rose immediately. He hadn't called in weeks. "I'm managing," I said carefully. "Why?" He hesitated. "Jessica heard something at the office. A journalist asked about an old deal. Something with a deli. They mentioned my name." I gripped the phone tightly, my pulse steady. He was fishing. He suspected, but he didn't know. "A deli," I repeated, keeping my voice even. "I don't know anything about that, Mark." There was silence, then a short laugh, brittle around the edges. "Yeah, probably nothing. Just reporters trying to stir things up. Anyway, I wanted to say I'm sorry about the other week. About the chemo thing. We should do dinner soon. My treat." My lips curled into a bitter smile he couldn't see. His words were honey laid over poison, empty sweetness to disguise his fear. "Don't worry about me, sweetheart," I said softly. "Focus on your life." "I'm fine." I hung up before he could respond further. Sitting back in my chair, I closed my eyes. He thought he had fooled me with his sudden concern, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. He was rattled. And what he didn't know was that the fire burning at his feet had been set by his own mother. The days that followed felt like watching a storm gather. Another article appeared, this time in a larger publication. It named Brighton Bay directly and described the company's pattern of undervaluing small businesses. It mentioned a young, ambitious analyst tied to several questionable deals. Though they didn't print Mark's name, insiders knew exactly who it pointed to. Messages began flooding Brighton Bay's official social media accounts. "How many families have you destroyed? How many small shops have you stolen?" Investors started asking questions. Whispers of investigation grew louder. I read every word, my hands steady for the first time in months. Each headline, each angry comment was a stone thrown at the glass tower Mark had built. And then came the post that broke everything open. A photo surfaced online, Mark and Jessica smiling, champagne in hand, at that very engagement dinner. The caption congratulated him on his bright future, but the timing, so close to the scandal stories, turned it sour. Strangers shared it with biting comments, celebrating while destroying lives. Perfect picture of greed. Jessica's name soon joined his in the whispers. Her role in investor relations made her appear complicit, even if she hadn't signed a single document. By association, her reputation began to tarnish. The fallout was swift. A financial watchdog announced an official inquiry. Rumors spread that Brighton Bay's clients were pulling out. By the end of the week, Mark's once shining name was being spoken in boardrooms not as rising star, but as liability. I should have felt guilt, but I didn't. What I felt was balance. For once, the scales were tipping in favor of the people like Tony and people like me who had been trampled for too long. But fate is cruel in its timing. Just as the headlines grew louder, my body reminded me of its own limits. It started with a dull ache in my head one evening as I read through yet another article. I rubbed my temples, telling myself it was just exhaustion, but then the room began to tilt. My vision blurred, colors bleeding together. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me. The laptop screen glowed on the table, the latest headline staring back at me. Brighton Bay analyst accused in shady dealings. Mark's world was collapsing, just as I had planned, but my own body was collapsing too. I fell hard against the rug, my cheek pressing into its worn fibers. My chest heaved, but air felt scarce. I reached out a trembling hand toward the table, toward the proof of my revenge, but my fingers only brushed empty air. The last thing I remember before the darkness closed in was the hum of the laptop fan and the flashing notification of yet another message about the scandal. My heart beat fast, then weak, and I whispered into the emptiness. He finally knows what it feels like to lose everything. And then I let go. When I opened my eyes, the world around me was hazy. The floor was rough beneath my cheek, the faint hum of my laptop the only sound in the room. My body felt heavy, uncooperative, as if it no longer belonged to me. For a moment, I wondered if this was the end, If after all my battles, my story was ending alone on a worn-out rug. Then I heard the sound of keys rattling at the door. My mind panicked. Who could it be? Mark didn't have a key anymore. My heart thudded in my chest, weak but insistent. The door creaked open, and a familiar voice called out, "Irene?" Oh my God. It was Brenda. She rushed to my side, her hands steady but urgent. She touched my face, checking my pulse with a practiced calm. "Stay with me," she said firmly. "You're not leaving me here, not like this." Her eyes flicked toward the table. She saw the laptop screen still glowing, the headlines screaming about Brighton Bay. A look of realization crossed her face, but she didn't ask questions. Instead, she pulled out her phone, her voice clear and commanding as she spoke into it. "This is Nurse Brenda Carter. I found my neighbor collapse. She's breathing, but she may have had a stroke. Send an ambulance to 424 Grand Avenue." "Yes, immediately." She ended the call and gripped my hand. "Help is on the way. You're not alone." For a fleeting second, I wanted to cry, not from pain, but from gratitude. In my weakest moment, the one person who showed up wasn't my son. It was the woman who had offered me a ride, the stranger who had become a lifeline. Minutes later, footsteps thundered up the stairs. The door burst open, but it wasn't the paramedics. It was Mark. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his face pale. For a moment, I thought, foolishly, that he had come because he cared. But his eyes darted immediately to the laptop. He rushed toward it, slamming it shut with shaking hands. "What did you do, Mom?" he hissed, his voice frantic. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to me?" Brenda stood up slowly, positioning herself between him and me. "What did she do?" "No, Mark, what did you do?" "I saw that announcement. I saw the photo of you celebrating while your mother begged for a ride to her final treatment. You left her to suffer while you raised a glass." Mark froze, caught off guard by her words. He looked at her as if she were a stranger invading his world. "You don't know anything about this," he snapped. "This is family business." "No," Brenda said firmly, her voice ringing with conviction. "It stopped being family business the moment you abandoned her. You should be ashamed. She needed you. And you weren't there." The sound of sirens wailed outside, growing louder. Moments later, paramedics rushed into the room, followed by 2 police officers. They moved quickly to lift me onto a stretcher, their efficiency a blur around me. One officer turned to Brenda. "What happened here?" "She collapsed," Brenda explained. "I'm a nurse. I checked her over. She needs immediate care. And that," she added, pointing to Mark, "is her son. The same one who left her to fend for herself." The officer's gaze hardened as she looked at Mark. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to straighten his jacket. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "She's exaggerating." "I was just..." But his words faltered. In that room, with the truth laid bare and strangers witnessing his downfall, excuses sounded hollow. I watched from the stretcher, my body weak but my mind clear. I had thought revenge meant tearing his world apart, and in many ways I had done just that. But the deeper truth was staring me in the face. Real justice wasn't in his humiliation. It was in the kindness of the woman who knelt beside me, who had shown more loyalty in weeks than he had in years. As the paramedics wheeled me out, I caught Brenda's eye. She gave me a small, steady smile, the kind that says, "I'm here. You don't have to fight alone anymore." In that moment, I understood something I wish I had learned sooner. Blood may bind us, but it does not define us. Family isn't always the people who share your name. Sometimes, it's the ones who choose to stand beside you when you're at your weakest. Mark's reputation would continue to crumble in the days that followed, his company under scrutiny, his engagement strained, his image in ruins. But as for me, my revenge had already taken shape. Not in headlines, not in whispers of scandal, but in the truth that my story didn't end in betrayal. It ended in unexpected compassion. I had spent years believing my worth depended on my son's love. But in that hospital bed, with Brenda at my side, I realized my worth was never his to give or take. So, dear viewer, let me leave you with this. People may fail you, even those you love most. But don't mistake their absence as proof that you are alone. Somewhere out there, Kindness waits in the most unlikely places. Hold on to that. Because in the end, my story wasn't about the son who betrayed me. It was about the nurse who saved me. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far this journey carried me. I began as a weary mother, hurt beyond words by the son I had sacrificed everything for. His betrayal could have been the end of me, and in some ways it nearly was. But pain has a strange way of shaping you. What began as heartbreak became fuel. What began as weakness grew into determination. Yes, I sought revenge. I won't deny that. I wanted my son to feel the sting of abandonment, the humiliation of being exposed. And for a time, that fire kept me alive. Watching his world crumble gave me a sense of balance I thought I'd never feel again. But here's the truth I didn't expect. Revenge wasn't the real ending of my story. It was only the bridge. The true ending came in the form of kindness, from a nurse who barely knew me, who offered me a ride when my own son turned his back, who held my hand when my body failed me. Brenda showed me something my son never could. Love without condition, loyalty without obligation. That's the lesson I carry with me now. Family isn't about bloodlines or last names. It's about actions. It's about who shows up when life leaves you broken on the floor. Trust is not inherited. It is earned, one choice at a time. And sometimes, the people who step into your life unexpectedly will treat you with more devotion than the ones you raised from birth. So if you hear anything in my story, hear this. Do not let betrayal define you. Do not let cruelty harden you into silence. Look for the helpers, the strangers who surprise you with compassion. They are out there, waiting to remind you that goodness still exists in this world. And to you, dear listener, I offer my prayer. May you never be abandoned in your hour of need, and may kindness find you where you least expect it. If you've ever been touched by unexpected kindness, if someone once stood by you when others turned away, then I ask you to honor them here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your story in the comments. Let this space become more than just a story. It can become a community, a place where we remind each other that hope is real, even in the darkest nights. Because in the end, my story isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about peace. It's about realizing that while my son may have failed me, life did not. Life gave me Brenda. And maybe, just maybe, life is waiting to give you a Brenda too. Thank you for watching.